Welcome back. Andrzej is going to be coming up shortly. We have a panel discussion, and Andrzej, we certainly would like to thank you for helping us put this together. We're most excited about what is to unfold very shortly. So, Andrzej, I'm simply going to say thank you for being here with us today. Take it away, my friend. It's all yours.
Well, thank you, Scott, and thank you, David, once again. It's an incredible pleasure to be here and to co-host this wonderful event. Distinguished guest speakers, ladies and gentlemen, we live at a time when the convergence of physical and digital is sprinting to become a one-to-one relationship, where our palm serves as a cell phone, where every step of our space missions is becoming increasingly more automated. But with every step of digitalization, the threat surface available to hackers increases exponentially as well. Many are surprised that cybercrime has become the #1 crime in the world and the third largest economy after US and China. But in my humble estimate, we haven't even scratched the surface of digitalizing our physical world, where everything from an IoT chair to our rocket going into space has a cyber avatar. And therefore, we haven't even started to provide cyber criminals with an economy that has the potential to dwarf that of the United States. Cybersecurity, therefore, now underpins not only every bit of digitalization, but also every bit of national, organizational, and mission level strategy, as well as every bit of technology innovation and every bit of regulatory policy innovation. There is no room anymore for coming up with strategies, technologies, or regulatory policies that do not have a cyber corollary. If you're a board director, not internalizing this new normal can literally drive your organization's extinction. And for all of our lawmakers in the audience, moving the needle in policy is no longer acceptable or even enough. Actual policy innovation is the only way to win the global race. Yet most executives and lawmakers are unfortunately still wrapped up in the physical world problems that they don't realize that they literally have 3 nations and organizations that they have to be building simultaneously: the physical one, the digital one, and the cyber secure one. Anything short of that is like building an institution without doors and windows and hoping a burglar won't notice. What makes this worse is that most government officials, board directors, and CEOs still mistakenly think that cybersecurity is their CTO's area of focus. But would you outsource the strategy for your physical organization to your CTO? No, regardless of how amazing the CTO is. Similarly, your CTO cannot develop a strategy, nor should they, for what your digital organization should look like in cyberspace and what level of cybersecurity your digital crown jewels require. Only you can do that. Moreover, every organization is becoming a technology organization. If you do not think so, unfortunately, you'll be proven wrong by your competition, be it a nation state or another corporation, who is all too happy about you thinking otherwise. And if you do understand that, then it's only natural that you agree that every CEO, government official, board director, and lawmaker has to become technology and cybersecurity literate or suffer the consequences of, again, getting stuck in the physical and not paying attention to what needs to be done in the digital and the cybersecure layers of our nations. For all of these topics, please feel free to listen to my opening remarks this morning as soon as the recording is launched, if you have not had the opportunity to attend them in person earlier. And perhaps our amazing conference team can drop a note into the chat for when that will be accessible. But all of this is just the tip of the iceberg. Geopolitics and the war for cybersecurity supremacy is becoming more complex. Every CEO and boardroom that has anything of value is getting dragged into that race. China and the US are 2 behemoths that are flexing their muscles. But as I always say, cyber warfare is not nuclear warfare and therefore is not expensive, which makes even the poorest of nations capable of having a seat at the table. How do we as a United States continue to win this war for cybersecurity supremacy along with our allies by our side? This is one topic we will tackle today. Furthermore, regulatory affairs are becoming more complex and require much more focus on successful partnerships between our governments and our innovation space. Yet, most lawmakers do not understand technology enough, much less cybersecurity. This just breeds cybersecurity regulation that is behind the curve of technology innovation and is therefore devoid of scalability before it even becomes law. Cybersecurity breaches and privacy violations occurring every day in the media are just two manifestations of this problem. How do we promote cybersecurity policy that is not only right for our times, but is scalable with technology, and three, doesn't get stuck in the quagmire of a regulatory process? This is another topic we will explore in today's panel. Further yet, to win the war on cybersecurity supremacy, an ecosystem building approach is critical, where we bring together the brightest minds and the most innovatively thinking parts of our economies, governments, and academia and unleash their full potential. How do we achieve successful cybersecurity ecosystemic building most effectively and efficiently with a winning private sector, government, and non-government partnership when we do not have the authoritarian card that another large nation might have at their disposal, allowing them to force all stakeholders to do a dictator's bidding? Successful cybersecurity ecosystemic building is another topic we will discuss today. In support of such successful cybersecurity ecosystem building, smart, scalable, informed not only by its times, but ahead of its times, domestic and international cybersecurity policy is critical. How do we achieve that? This will form another layer of our discussion today. To tackle these major issues of ecosystem building, smart policy, strong public-private partnership, and continuously winning the battle for cybersecurity supremacy, I am thrilled to welcome you to our panel on building successful national ecosystems of cybersecurity innovation and private government partnership. Hi, my name is Andrzej Cetnarski, and along with General Harry Radigi, I have the incredible privilege of co-chairing today's summit. I'm a Harvard, Wharton, and University of Chicago trained national security and cybersecurity, tech innovation, regulatory policy, and organizational strategist, former technology and defense UBS investment banker, serial global entrepreneur, and now CEO of Cyber Defense Ecosystem, Cyber Nation Central, and executive producer of the VIP Cybersecurity Blueprint that has strengthened the cybersecurity of hundreds of leaders globally, from heads of state and UN officials to global CEOs, board directors, and entrepreneurs. For today's discussion, I am thrilled to be joined by three dear friends and colleagues who will help answer some of these questions and likely raise others because of the brilliance they represent. Each will add to my brief introduction of them and also introduce their organization, its mission, and its significance to today's discussion. Before I introduce the first speaker, let me remind everyone that we will be taking audience questions towards the end portion of the panel. So please start asking questions in the chat, and our summit team will select the ones most fitting of our panelists' backgrounds and the answer to which has the potential to indeed push our national agendas the furthest. Let me first introduce fellow Harvard Kennedy School MCMPA alumnus Nand Mulchandani, who is not only an incredibly successful serial cybersecurity Silicon Valley entrepreneur that has sold multiple of his companies to the tech giants, but who has translated his private sector success into our American national security prowess as both CTO and formerly acting director of the US Department of Defense Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, DoD-JAIC, where he helps transform the Department of Defense in adopting next generation AI and software technologies. Nand, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you so much, Andre. That was a great intro. Obviously, not sure if I deserve all of it, but so excited to be here, and thank you for having me. So just a quick background, and just to add to Andre's point, I spent 25 plus years here in Silicon Valley as CEO and founder of multiple companies, and as part of sort of giving back to the country, about 2 years ago, joined the Department of Defense as the JAIC's CTO and took over as acting director for a couple of months, which was an experience in and of itself, leading an agency at the DoD. So the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, or the JAIC as we call it, is the focal point for the Department of Defense's focus on artificial intelligence, and both from an enabling and a scaling standpoint. So one of the things that we'd like to point out is that the JAIC is actually not a research organization. We're a, what General Groen, who's the current director, likes to say, a do tank, not a think tank. And the focus really is, on one end, we've got industry, which is doing amazing work, industry, academia, researchers doing amazing work in artificial intelligence. And the focus really is, how do we actually pull that technology in the most efficient and fast manner to deploy that in the 3 million plus, $700 billion plus budget of the DoD, just in almost a what I call a setup to fail job, an impossible task. So one more thing to add at the JAIC is we actually have an incredibly broad charter, all the way from building products and core IP and technology. So we have actually 6 verticals, 30 different products across 6 verticals. One of them, which is cybersecurity, which is an incredibly key one, but other ones are things like health, predictive maintenance, business automation, and then of course, joint warfighting. But then we also span other things, like for instance, acquisition. What's the best way to acquire technology and pull it into the DoD and set up the preconditions for the insertion and use of this technology? Because DoD, we have tons and tons of policies and things that really don't set the right preconditions for pulling in this new technology. So policy changes, acquisition changes, talent and education, and plus, of course, the core tech pieces there. So an incredibly broad and vast charter for a very small group, but that's what makes it exciting. Andre, I think you might be muted by accident here.
Yes, indeed I was. So let me repeat the praise for you. Cybersecurity and AI across the private and government sector, my friend, is simply invaluable to our discussion today. So thank you for joining us.
Lovely, thank you.
Our next speaker is David Chorish, whom I have had the pleasure of collaborating with during my many trips to Israel, inclusive of its very impressive cybersecurity ecosystem out of Beersheba. David is the leader for cybersecurity strategy and international policy at the Israel National Cyber Directorate in the Office of the Prime Minister, and has previously served on the Israel Defense Forces, IDF General Staff J5, working on force development and political military affairs. He is a trained advocate and has published award-winning writing on strategy and technology. David, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Excellent. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, Andre, and also for your Israeli accent that you put on for the Hebrew names. This is a privilege for me to be here. Yes. So yes, it's an honor, and to join such distinguished colleagues as well. So yes, you've done the introduction. Maybe I'll just say a few words about the Israel National Cyber Directorate, where I currently serve. The Israel National Cyber Directorate, or INCD for short, is the principal cybersecurity organization in Israel on the national level, geared towards the civilian sector. It's basically a more or less unique, almost unique model that aims to be very holistic. So it's basically a one-stop shop that does also regulatory work, also operational work, and also technological work. It is, first of all, geared towards providing protection towards Israel's critical infrastructure, but it also puts out advisories and alerts towards the wider public. It works together with civilian regulators in order to try and get this kind of baseline of cyber standards within the different sectors. It has an operational role. It runs the national CERT, which is based in Beersheba, as you mentioned. It does incident response for incidents that have national level consequences, and it invests in R&D, and it invests in the wider ecosystem, which I think is the main discussion for today. Really working with some of the other players in cybersecurity in the end cybersecurity is first of all a people's job, and it's a cooperation job. So we're really working hard to kind of pull together the industry, the academia, and so forth. So it'll be a pleasure here to have this discussion and to share some of our insights and our experience.
Wonderful. Well, your leadership over Israel's cybersecurity and the ecosystemic build-out is truly invaluable for our panel today, as the audience will see. So I'm really looking forward to that engagement. Thank you for joining us, David. Our third speaker today is another dear friend of 15 years, in fact, and fellow Wharton MBA classmate, Apoorv Saxena, Global Head of AI and Managing Director of JP Morgan Chase, who not only oversees AI technology for asset and wealth management of JP Morgan, but is also the Global Head of firm-wide AI and machine learning services for JP Morgan Chase. Prior to JP Morgan, he was product and business lead for Google Cloud AI, to be more specific, solutions, where he managed 6 product lines and was responsible for product vision, growth and revenue, user experience, and resource planning. Apoorv, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you, Tandru. Thank you, Andres. You guys can hear me?
Very well.
Awesome. Now, you put on a very good Indian accent as well when you pronounce the Indian names. So, as you said in the introduction, I'm the firm-wide head of AI technology at the firm, very similar to what Nand is doing for DOD. I think this is a central org within with JP Morgan that works with various stakeholders within the firm to scale and build out AI for the various businesses that we are in. This position was created almost 3.5 years back under direction of Jamie Dimon, who is the CEO, who believes that digitization and AI are fundamental technologies that are going to be transformative in the way we serve financial services in the world. Those of you who don't know, JP Morgan is a global bank, #1 in the US, #5, I believe, in terms of assets under management across the world. Almost $3 trillion assets under management, serving half of all US households, and almost $31 trillion of assets under custody. So we have a very global footprint, and we touch on almost every piece of the financial services business, including how we protect ourselves. So I think this is where AI becomes critical. And this is where I, in my current role, work with various stakeholders within the firm and also externally to bring the latest and the greatest technology to how we run our business. And happy to share that my experience in doing this in this conversation. So thank you for the invite, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Apoorv. So your leadership in AI revolution, as I'd call it, in one of obviously the most critical parts of our global critical infrastructure, which is the financial sector, and indeed AI's application into our cybersecurity of our nations is truly simply invaluable to today's discussion. So thank you for joining us. So let's kick off with the first question on successful cybersecurity ecosystem building. David, I am, as I mentioned earlier, in constant admiration of the Israeli cybersecurity ecosystem and its epicenter out of Beersheba, although I guess Tel Avivians would disagree with that statement. And I've had the privilege to officially visit, as you know, a couple of times, and I sit on the board of the Negev High-Tech Startup Accelerator at Ben Gurion University as well. Given our global executive audience on the call today, what lessons can we learn and apply from Israel's stronghold in cybersecurity and its ecosystem building best practices to help catalyze more efficient nation-level cybersecurity ecosystems?
Yes, that's a question that I actually get quite a lot. They kind of look at the successful Israeli model and they say, well, what is the secret to your success? We want to copy it and do it ourselves. I think that's a kind of a natural kind of response. But, in my view, there isn't really a cookbook for successful innovation ecosystems. I think that this really is something that it involves a lot of trial and error, and it involves a lot of unique tailoring towards everyone's unique conditions. You're very aware of Israel's unique conditions and especially our security conditions. It so happens, I don't know if you're aware, but today we're actually marking our Memorial Day. And tomorrow is that gets followed by our Independence Day celebrations. So Israel is officially turning 72. And so, this is actually a good time to reflect on some of those security conditions that in the end have really helped to condition some of our innovation success. They say that necessity is the mother of invention, and that has really played out in our case. And so I guess, in some ironic sense, we can, thank some of our adversaries for some of our success. But definitely, while that has been a driving factor, I think that it's generally well understood that in order to have a successful ecosystem, you need to look at all the different stakeholders involved, also the government and the security sector, also the academia, also the corporates, the startups, and venture capital. And all of those players that I've just mentioned, they all have a role to play. And you also have to foster the connections between them. And that's been maybe kind of the crux of some of our experience. So, some of the those connections are very well known. The kind of synergy between the operational and technological experience that a lot of our cadets gain during their draft service that comes out afterwards into expression in the startup and in the more enterprising civilian field. Less well known, but also well recognized by people who follow would be the program, the Yozma program back in the 90s, in which very outward friendly, VC friendly policies created the conditions for some serious venture capital in Israel, and that was really a major factor in the startup scene. There are other elements. The more recent ones that you mentioned that my organization was very directly involved in is the idea of clustering, of bringing these stakeholders to get together into a geographical area that's more concentrated, as we have been attempting to do in Beersheba. And in the end, I would evaluate similar to you that Beersheba has not yet bypassed Tel Aviv. Probably not even close. But even Tel Aviv would be a good example of if you take a look at how many cyber companies get concentrated into just a few blocks, and where they are with vis-a-vis the IDF headquarters where I served until just a couple of years ago. So clustering has been that kind of geographical, and not just geographical, I think also psychological closeness of everybody together. In Israel, you can find everyone within 2 degrees of separation on WhatsApp, no more than that. So that really kind of helps create the network of connections that is essential, I think, to any kind of innovation ecosystem. So that kind of throws out some ideas. Maybe I'll leave it at that for the time being, and let some of my colleagues jump in. But yeah, it's not really a clear-cut issue, and it's one that's, as I said, it involves a whole bunch of factors, and they're constantly evolving, right? So even today, when we look at how to maintain our edge, that's something that we're constantly looking at and constantly trying to work out what is the next step we need to do.
Indeed. And Nand, given our audience and drawing on the lessons from your time as a very successful serial Silicon Valley cybersecurity entrepreneur, and from your current role as CTO for the DoD, Jake, what do you think we as a country are doing well, and where do we need to improve in our ability of building an even better cybersecurity ecosystem infrastructure?
Great. Yeah. So I'd say the one big theme, so I've been at the DoD for about 2 years now, so long enough to actually have a firm opinion on this, is, David pointed out the whole side of industry and all the innovation that, the industry and academic community is there. The piece that I feel is that, sort of to add to that, is that we at the DoD and the government in general need to be better customers of technology. One of the big things that I don't think we have realized in the government or DoD specifically, and coming from the Valley, is that technology eats everything in its path. It just completely decimates anything in its path. And that the world's greatest organizations are tech companies at heart that happen to be in different businesses, because the level of agility, scale, competitive advantage that brings is just phenomenal. So at the heart of that, the next point is, if you layer that, the thing is about architecture, right? How have you built the foundational architecture that allows you to pull in tech and scale it? Now, at the DoD specifically, the joke that I have is that we are fortunately or unfortunately, we are a hardware-centric organization, right? It's all about the hardware. But as we know now from repeated, years and years and years of stuff that they teach us at school or we see out there in the industry, is software and this orientation around moving from hardware to software. These secular changes have happened everywhere, but the DoD is we're still focused on the hardware piece and don't really get the fact how this transformation and change is going to happen. So one of the things that we're trying to drive at the JAIC, and of course we focus on artificial intelligence, but AI is a second order effect. After you have your basic software architecture right, the AI pieces for at least the scaled parts of AI are very easy to do, we're finding. Once you have the data labeled, you have the architecture, you have the platforms in place, the AI piece is literally just a marginal add on top of it. Whether it be cyber or be warfighting or be business intelligence automation, it's easy. So the real question now becomes, how do we actually get the underlying sort of architecture, the platforms, the infrastructure ready? Now, there's good news and bad news, and putting on my entrepreneur hat, I'm always have a positive, view towards this, which is even 2 years ago when I joined, you felt that you were in a dense, dark forest, sort of trying to hack away at vines and sort of having, literally make progress a foot at a time. The good news is now, in these 2 years, just the focus on AI, the National Security Commission on AI just released their report, Congress, the focus on artificial intelligence, the JAIC is now a direct report to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, which is as high as you're going to go in terms of, focus, and her attention and the new secretary's focus on AI and new tech is incredibly important. And now people are talk about DevOps and how do we actually develop code faster, how we get it on production networks, and then how do we actually become sort of a better customer for this building platforms. This stuff has just gone through a massive, massive change in the past 2 years. The last piece that I'll say about in cyber specifically is cyber security. There's sort of two sides to this, right? There's the defense side and the offense side. And, we run a global network, obviously an insanely large global network. We have partners and allies connecting in. We have literally 1.5 million to 2 million employees logging in remotely over the past year. I mean, think of the scale of the operation. Just the number of remote people are larger than, certain, countries out there. So our surface area is just absolutely insanely large. And the problem is that we have 20 to 30 different networks that all connect together with different security rules, different authorizing officials, different security officials and platforms, products and things. And hackers love nothing else but being able to exploit those gaps, both from a layer perspective and from a network perspective. So we are architecturally, again, one of those places very, very hard to defend. But again, there's a recognition and a focus on fixing that. And we can kind of see the horizon lifting up from this dark forest. We can actually see the horizon, I think, a little bit in terms of that. Over.
Interesting. And before we jump to Apoorv, let me push one point, which is obviously the cybersecurity angle, and specifically for you, the AI angle in national security is such a critical component of our broader national security. Right. How would you advise those that are looking at getting their organizations more aligned into the national security vision of the country, and aligning their corporate strategies to more closely work, whether it's out of Silicon Valley or out of the corporate boardroom, with the DoD and with the broader government space to, again, further that national security agenda by using cybersecurity and AI more effectively?
Wow. Okay. So very, very deep question. I think, and this is an area where I think there's an aspect of tech and there's an aspect of policy, which I think are critical issues. From a tech issue, there's obviously all the stuff that we discuss in terms of architecture and platforms and things like that. That's there. But let me move to the policy piece. I've been in the vulnerability and protection market for a long time, and one of the things that we are not doing well, and I think though that there's an incredible focus on it. If you look at some of the announcements in terms of the people being hired in and put in, at the National Security Council level, at the White House level, et cetera, you can see that there's an incredible focus on building out talent and policy around this. But today, the connection between private citizenry and private industry and the government is still very weak. Right now, actually, you might see in certain countries, actually, there are policy changes now, where the government is actually actively now enabled to assist private industry, and private industry itself is now enabled to actually take more proactive action in terms of cybersecurity threats and things like that. We still don't have those conditions set in the United States. And I think that really absolutely hampers us from that standpoint, because a sovereign country attacking a private industry or private citizen, that is a no-win game, right? You know who's going to lose every single time. So the fact is that asymmetry does need to get actually ironed out. It's the equivalent of what I said is, if a sovereign country came and brought a helicopter in and picked up one of our citizens and took them out, right? Or bombed their house, of course the government has a reason and policy and need to intervene. Well, that doesn't exist in cyber. So that asymmetry is something that we're going to continue to actually face. And I think it's very important for us to fix that at some point.
David, I am coming to you on that point because Israel has just come out with policies around that. So
yes,
put a pin in that for a second. Apoorv,
exactly.
The same question to you. Obviously, the financial sector is one of the largest pieces of the global critical infrastructure, and certainly the US. What lessons can we learn and apply from the financial sector that you've seen and from the best practices of JP Morgan towards creating more efficient nation-level cybersecurity ecosystems and stronger partnership between the government, private sector, and applied academia? How do we get ahead and stay ahead in the global race for cybersecurity supremacy? And how do we use AI to do that most efficiently and effectively?
I think a great question. I think if you think about it, banking and financial services starts with trust. That's the most important thing that you're essentially providing to your customer. Other than their personal life, their most valuable assets are with the bank, and no wonder financial services is a source or the target of attacks in almost every form. And cybersecurity plays probably the number one or most important thing in sort of protecting that trust with our customer. So that's where it starts. And so from our beginning, I think financial services in general, especially a global bank with a global footprint and increasing surface area all the time, this is seen as one of the major investment area for us. Just to give you some stats, we spend almost $1 billion per year in terms of how you protect ourselves within just spend on our cybersecurity, just to give you some sense. We have a three-part approach to this. Number one is you have to have a layered approach to security. No single layer can protect you. And I think, again, this is very well known in the space, but just having a network security or having a physical security is not good enough. You have to have a very take an approach where you have multiple layers of failure if you do actually get breached to protect yourselves, number one. Number two is zero trust. You have to assume that almost every how we protect ourselves, we assume that the intruder is already inside the firm, and how we design our cloud security is Nand's talked about. Digitization and cloud adoption of cloud is completely changing the surface area on which you can be attacked. And how we protect ourselves, how we treat that new forms of sort of platforms that we are building is critical. And having a zero trust approach is what we take internally. And the third is you have to take an approach where your surface area is going to completely change almost every day. As we launch new products like cryptocurrency is a classic example of some of the things that you use to protect your internal assets are not able to be really applicable in a cryptocurrency situation. So as we are increasing launching new products, or we are launching in new companies or new regions, we have to completely redefine what are the sort of protection that we use to protect ourselves. So we have which is an approach which was called our threat vector changes almost every day. And in the way we think about ecosystem is we work definitely with the technology sector. I'm in Silicon Valley with tech companies helping us protect ourselves. But I think the two other vectors that we really key on is academia, especially when it comes to AI. A lot of the interesting work around how AI can be used for cybersecurity is being done in academia. And so we have, for example, we created a research investment forum where we have identified 40 universities across the firm. 10 of these are highly focused on doing research in cybersecurity and AI, and bringing those, this is sponsorship of PhD programs, sponsorship of professors, and then using that work that they have done to apply that within the firm is one of the sort of initiatives that we are doing. And you have to understand each of these stakeholders, whether it's public sector or private sector or academia, bring different value to your sort of strategy. Academia is great for new innovative research, rethinking how you're thinking about your current approach, but not great for applied AI. And this is where we team them up with the very specific applied AI talent, along with the research talent, to come to make it something useful for us. Same thing with the public sector. I think Nand's talked about it. The asymmetry that exists between private enterprise being attacked by a nation enterprise is huge. And one of the areas where we are very actively collaborating is educating our regulators in how a threat from AI is increasing the area, type of attacks that you can sort of be, type of threats that you are exposed to. So there's a lot of education involved as well. And so we see public sector as a key partner for us, where we as sort of financial services sector has an opportunity to teach and train and educate our public sector partners, and then in working with them to define the policies that we need to define. So we have taken a multi-level approach, and happy to share more details as needed.
So let me actually push this point a little bit further, and any one of you feel free to jump in on the answer on this. But one of the constant gripes or complaints that I do hear when talking with folks across government, applied academia, and the private sector is precisely this desire to collaborate, and yet there not being enough well-oiled processes to make that easier. And so obviously one of the countries that comes up as an example is China, where it's a little bit easier to do that because the government has whatever the power that the government there has. And so it's easier for private sector and applied academia to sort of fall in line of what the government mandates. Obviously, the US works quite differently, and yet the need and desire for collaboration is very real. If you were sitting in front of either congressional leaders right now or private sector multi-billion-dollar corporations, as you guys do, what would you say we could be doing better in order to oil those processes better?
I could take that first stab at it. So one of the areas where information sharing, I think whether it's anti-money laundering, fraud, the threats that we see are seen by not just by us, but by almost every other constituent in the private sector. So making easy access to information sharing and access to just a platform that allows us to share data with our peers is going to be a huge help. I do know like there's multiple efforts being there, but I think we haven't not reached to a point where that information sharing is easy, and then they're not only easy but also it's actionable. A lot of the information, like the classic multiple examples where the same multiple banks were attacked with the same sort of threat, and we were not able to detect and or leverage each other's information effectively. So that's number one. I think the other areas, and anti-money laundering is a great example where there's some really good collaboration happening. I think other thing to think about it, new technology like blockchain allow easy access and sharing of information, but they are so early in adoption cycle and not so far away from policy decision making that we are not even thinking about leveraging that. But accelerating that piece would be huge in terms of how we share information and use that information to protect ourselves. So those are the two things that come to mind that we can definitely work with stakeholders in the public sector to enable.
So pushing that a little bit further even, so Tesla comes up as an example of, right, Elon Musk decides he's going to do open source on the information on a particular model. Everybody can jump in on it. China can do similar things through government's intervention, but that's hard. How do we do that better?
So Andrzej, let me take a stab at that, because this has been a big issue for us around, obviously, AI. The entire development process is data-centric. So we've had to really, really rethink our entire model and focus on data. So first and foremost is we actually have a chief data officer now at the DoD, and actually mandated every single agency and service in turn has a CDO. So the data problem is a real problem and an important one. So one of the things that the very fundamental problem was the data ownership issues in terms of who gets to own the data that our systems generate, number one, because all of our development is outsourced. The second piece is, where does development happen? So if you're training a model, for instance, or doing development with DoD data. So this is where we at the JAIC and the CDO office have made some major changes in terms of, for instance, when we work with industry, we now bring industry into our own enclaves at the DoD to do development work. And then the residual IP rights, so we own the data, we will continue to own the data. Also, not only because there are ownership issues, but there are all kinds of adversarial AI issues, right? In terms of knowing the data, knowing the vulnerabilities, the attack surface. I mean, the data and the code now are completely enmeshed together. There's no difference between them. So we're going to protect our data and our models and code just like we would for any weapon system, et cetera, there. However, we need to be able to bring them in and have the policies and things so that industry is also gaining something from it, things like residual IP rights. So we've had to actually really, really rework this. The great news is that we make huge progress on it. So we now have an entire sort of acquisition sort of model and thinking around data in AI and other pieces. And the point that Apoorv pointed out in terms of things like real-time vulnerability or attacks, et cetera, that's in a different sort of category of stuff, which in my mind is more operational rather than dev time and sort of build time. And those streams, though, again, the IP rights, the ownership, and the distribution of that have some significant issues that still need to get worked through from a policy perspective. But when it comes to static data and owning that data, we at least have had a really good sort of big push on that. And then we're exporting this model out to the rest of the agencies of the government as well. So we have a uniform model of how do we deal with that. Over.
Now, I can second what Nand just said. I think a lot of, especially when you're applying AI to any problem, whether it's cybersecurity, the modeling part is the easier part. Access to right data, ownership of data, and having the right data infrastructure and protecting that data is going to be key piece. And I think a lot of people over-index on the modeling piece and under-index on the data piece. And I think this is as you are thinking about applying AI to cybersecurity or any other problems, this is one area that you need to over-invest and have a very forward-looking policies. And the good thing is new technologies are coming up like federated ML, which allows you to not approaches a slightly different manner than centralizing all data access. But again, this is something and is involved will feel, but do not underinvest in your data and data infrastructure ownership piece.
Very important points. So David, bringing this back to you, the partnership between government and private sector is so critical from many different perspectives. One is obviously how do we better oil the processes of data sharing, information sharing, as Nand and Apoorv have really hit on the head. The other one, though, is this whole idea of what happens when cyber breaches happen and citizens are at risk, and yet companies are obviously not as excited about sharing the fact that they've been breached. So the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, just introduced a revised bill granting powers to the, in fact, National Cyber Directorate that requires organizations to carry out acts on the organization's computer systems to help address cyber attacks. And if I'm not mistaken, this happened over the last couple of days. The topic of better government-private sector partnership to address cyber breaches is obviously under constant debate. How do we do it? In the US, the SEC would like to do XYZ, yet public companies disclosing that they've been breached are dealing with shareholders and public prices dropping, etc. How do countries strike the right balance of breach disclosure versus protecting shareholder value? And where should governments be doing more? Where should the private sector be doing more?
So yeah, thank you for that question, and I'll try and give you an honest answer, and maybe afterwards I'll go back and refer to what Nand and Apoorv had to say, because they're really two different kinds of sharing: the sharing for protection and the sharing for development. So first of all, the bill that you mentioned hasn't yet passed. This is a very complicated topic that we've been struggling with for a while, and you know, in a hyper democracy like Israel, it's legislative change on such a sensitive issue that raises issues that have to do with privacy and IP and so forth. They're you know, they're very hard to move forward, right? The public discussion in Israel is let's just say robust, to say the least. So, but we are trying to push the needle forward on this issue. Our preference, though, and for the most part, this really has to be said, is that you know, that kind of legislative approach and authorities approach is really a line of last resort. For the most part, the way that we deal with incidences that happen in the private sector, and I can really have to commend Nand for the that analogy with the helicopters kidnapping citizens and so forth. So you know, we really do come to the aid of private sector organizations that are being hit by threats that we view to be of a national level importance. So obviously we don't go running for, you know, every single ransomware that happens in, you know, by criminal groups. And for the most part, we do get cooperation. You know, when you come knocking at the door and you say, you know, you have a problem, then most people respond, and it really is the best thing. Also from the business perspective, you know, in the end, you know, you don't want to be in a situation where you already know that somebody else knows, and you want to make sure that your customers, your shareholders, and so forth, they want to know that you're covered. So for the most part, we do get cooperation, and we do manage to do joint handling of incidences that are of interest. The legislation is designed for that small percentage of organizations that are kind of the outliers, the ones that you know, they really don't feel comfortable with government coming in, to the extent that even if they are kind of you know, leaking towards you know, they're through their infrastructure, other people are also suffering, and they don't care. So those are the cases in which we want to come in and kind of say, look, there is a public interest here for us to come in and do something a little bit more aggressive. I think that, you know, if I look ahead in the long term, and I think Apoorv will probably appreciate this coming from the financial sector, I think that a lot of the IT sector and the owners of IT infrastructure are, you know, kind of in the evolution of things, going to be heading towards a model that's closer towards the financial sector in terms of the kinds of responsibilities that we're going to be wanting to expect from those kind of organizations. You know, even on the basic level of know your customer, you know, and this is not just a national issue, this is an international issue, because, you know, if you take some of those you know, threat intelligence companies that like to have those fancy graphics of, you know, where is an attack coming from and where is it going to, you would look at one of those screens and you would think that, you know, Israel's biggest enemy is Europe and the US, right? But that's obviously not because there are any attackers coming from there. It's because they're going through there, and they're using basically allied IT infrastructure against other allies. And so this is really something that it's going to have to be addressed internationally, and kind of raising the bar and creating standards across the board. So that's maybe a little bit about the regulation for the cybersecurity aspect. On the development aspect, maybe what I'll kind of let you in on is that we've been doing in Israel also some work on our national AI strategy, and I think one of the useful concepts that we came up with was this kind of triad of data, people, and computing infrastructure. And when we're looking at what are the things that we're trying to share, in order to make sure that all the stakeholders get the maximum and that we manage to make the major synergies. So they're the three that we kind of identified. And we're working at the moment on the computing infrastructure on a cloud strategy that's going to help move that forward. That's going to involve also GovCloud and also public cloud working together, right, in a single infrastructure as kind of one solution for the infrastructure level. And on the people level, which is probably the most important of the three, if I had to give my personal opinion, we're looking at ways of how do we loosen kind of tenure rules within academia in order to allow more of that transfer into the business space. So things like that are in the end, they're just kind of dials that you turn in a particular sector, in this case academia, that kind of helps smooth things along. And obviously the data is like a big deal. There are some of us that think that maybe we're kind of too hung up on supervised learning, right, which is very data dependent, and whereas other kinds of reinforcement learning, for example, are less data dependent, and maybe we need to focus more there. But obviously, as long as supervised learning is also a very important part, so the data sharing is a big deal, and we're looking at anonymization techniques and other ways in which we can kind of help smooth things along. So that triad was kind of an important concept for us that helped us think things through.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Nand.
Yeah, let me just pile on to David's point. So throw in a little bit of sort of deeper, on the topic of AI on this point. When you think of sort of the cyber AI problem versus the AI problem for other stuff, let's take like joint warfighting as an example. The good news on cyber is that you're typically dealing with data types and data domains that are actually fairly well understood, right? Text and numerical data, et cetera. We have projects going on with things like full motion video, which is a whole different domain and insanely complicated problem. So David's point about, segmenting the technology and other pieces is an incredibly important one. I mean, at the end of the game, it's funny because, cybersecurity is a scaled industry. It's not a new industry. We've been using AI in that space for ages now, because the problem is that, security at the end of the game is a dial, right? It's a trade-off between false positives and false negatives and productivity versus lockdown, right? It's the classic sort of black and white trade-off of like, where are you going to push the dial? Now, as you crank the dial, you'll generate either more false positives, more false negatives, creating denial of service in terms of how you want to create lockdown in your security pieces. And that gets directly connected to how many people on the other end do you have for forensics, right? Now, the problem is that AI, unfortunately, has never solved this problem, because we're finding this, and I'd be curious to see David's and Apoorv's point of, we find that AI algorithms scale very well sort of from the 80 to 90% standpoint, but they asymptote. And you end up with this sort of problem of what I call the decision-making versus sort of decision support. And these algorithms are fantastic. We're finding AI algorithms are being fantastic for decision support, where you don't hand over the controls to the AI system, where in a security model, you would end up with a self-inflicted denial of service, effectively with a false positive or something. And things like autonomous weapon systems, for instance, we actually have policies like 3000.09 that guide that, where you don't want to hand off control, full autonomous control to a system that may end up, again, having false positives because you haven't explored the boundaries of where the data will take you and unexpected solutions with unexpected sort of pieces there. So it's an incredibly, incredibly complicated sort of space right now. And what's interesting is, in spite of, popular, what you read in the press, is I actually strongly feel we're still in the early days of AI and sort of doing this. And of course, just like every hockey stick, it's going to be slow. And then at some point it's going to rocket ship. But, in spite of all the discussion of like what AI has done, and it's done an incredible amount, munching away at the easy stuff, we're still in the early days of what's to come.
I'll probably pile on and add on. I think I do believe we are early stages, but even the early stages and some of the advances that are happening are eye-opening. Like synthetic data identity is a classic example of how sophisticated you can get with synthetic identity using very off-the-shelf open source AI tools should scare you. But not to the point where you are extrapolating and then talking about fully autonomous attacks, which is a different game. But I think there's even with the art of possible today, there's a lot that can be done. Social engineering is a classic example of where you can use very sophisticated GAN generated images to identify yourself as somebody third person, even to the point not only video, but also voice and audio can be completely changed to a person that you are trying to imitate or identify with. And that creates completely new avenues for you to do social engineering attacks. So think about it. And so I think we are clearly, especially I think David talked about KYC. We are within our KYC, knowing your customer, we are seeing very sophisticated synthetic identity attacks, and we have to be in front of it. Not only that, just identity part, key part of cybersecurity is like tracing the fingerprint of attacks and trying to see if this is real attack or a fake attack. There also, we are seeing some sophisticated application of AI to create those fingerprints so that it looks like a real normal usage rather than an anomaly usage in terms of how they traverse the network and so on and so forth. So I think point I'm making here is AI. I think the fully autonomous AI attacks is probably way further in the future, but there's enough happening right now that you should be aware of. That is very different from the traditional attacks that you have been seeing.
So let's move in that direction right now. And in fact, there's a question from the audience that will dovetail very well into the next set of subtopics. So I sometimes say that cybersecurity and AI, frankly, and I think we're all on the same page on that one, get over-romanticized. Well, AI can solve all of our problems, or cybersecurity is this thing that only the gods should be focused on, etc. And yet, when you really look, and in fact, JP Morgan has a great statistic, stated that over 99% of America's 28.7 million firms are small businesses. The vast majority, 88% of employer firms, have fewer than 20 employees. Two well-known statistics are that it takes organizations on average 6.5 months to find out that they've been breached, and unfortunately, 60% of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of a breach. How can we use AI across our organizations better, especially at the smaller and medium enterprises, to shorten that breach detection time and lower the chances of shutdown?
Nand, you want to take that first?
Yeah.
Sure.
You seem to be in this space for a long time before this.
So at least the answer I'd give is this, which is the ability for a small company to staff up the level of expertise, both at a cyber level and an AI level and everything. That's just an impossible task, right? I mean, IT folks at small businesses, God bless them, they're wearing 50 different hats, right? They're, I was a small business IT person when I was running my startups, right? I would do the Costco runs and then, configure the firewall, sort of in the evening, right? Now they got me out of that business, but the fact is that, that's a level of expertise they have to bring. So the good news is this, and the joke that I have is just like there's no Department of Electricity anymore at many of our organizations, right? We don't have a Department of Fire, right? The four of us aren't discussing this new technology called fire that's going to revolutionize cooking and protection and all this other stuff. There's going to be no Department of AI, and there's no department, So for small businesses, the best thing is they need to go with sort of proven, scaled, systems that can protect them against these sort of, how do you buy expertise? And the way you buy expertise is, so for instance, a good example is, instead of building your own cloud, right? And I hate to get this trite, but for instance, you would then go buy cloud from a vendor who can go hire the smartest people on the market to go lock this stuff down. Similarly, DDoS protection, right? You're never going to be able to withstand a sovereign attack from somebody who's trying to DDoS you. But if you're banking with a bank, Apoorv's bank, or David is running a company that's doing DDoS protection in the cloud that you can basically put your domain name onto and sort of get your website from being hacked. These are the type of sort of jujitsu that I think SMBs really need to do. So the answer is, I don't think you really need to do anything. The only piece I'd say is from a business process automation standpoint. So when we think of AI products or use cases at the DoD, I segment them into sort of two big pieces. One is cost and business process optimization, and then there's new revenue generation pieces there. From a cost avoidance standpoint, things like RPA and business process automation are going to save you money all day long, right? And so if you want to adopt those things, that gets you great cost savings, and they're very specific to your business. When it comes to cyber and dealing with AI and scale, go to the big companies who offer this level of blanket protection for you.
Nand or David, any additions?
Sure, maybe I'll jump in here. So yes, I very much agree with Nand that in the end, if you want to get the scalability, then you're going to have to be using some outside services. And I think one of the breathtaking, I would say, even developments in this is a mass migration to the cloud. This is something that has been going on for a number of years, and it's only accelerating. It comes to the point where we could find ourselves in a place where very large percentages of the private sector will be really concentrated in just a handful of sites. They're being run by these major cloud providers, and those cloud providers, if they're providing the at-scale security services, that will go a long way. That's not going to prevent a lot of the issues that have to do with also the skills that are involved in using the cloud, right? So the configuring right and all that stuff, and also the remote connection, right? So when you're in the end still using this remote routers and so forth, so those things are also going to have to be scaled. And we're working, for example, with our telcos on things that are going to try and give this kind of a broader protection across those kinds of devices that are really on mass use. I'm looking at these things from a national level. So we really try and look for those kind of choke points. The telcos, the cloud providers, and through them to try and get to the more scaled impact on the smaller businesses. The other example is, of course, one that we've already done, which is setting up the national CERT and providing this central address that everyone can, report incidents to. And when we're talking about particular sectors, like, for example, the financial sector, so then we get a lot of these businesses, which they vary on scale. There's the bigger ones, but also a lot of smaller ones that connect, where they can really come in and do some more automated sharing. And we try and create this kind of hub, a hub that has a number of different sectors in it and that can also communicate with each other. So those kind of centralized and scaled solutions are really the only way forward that we can see.
So let me maybe plug the other side of this issue, which is this whole idea of technology versus behaviors. And Nand or Apoorv, if you want to take this one, please feel free. Everyone focuses on AI's application to obviously nationwide or organization-wide IT and OT infrastructure. But one of the areas that's not as prevalent in conversations is that statistic that 95 to 97% of cybersecurity breaches are caused by, and Apoorv, you've already talked about it, social engineering, or exploiting human behavioral weaknesses, if you will. The executive ranks especially, right, have keys to the kingdom, access to everything. And so breaching an executive can have, especially for a small or medium enterprise, for those listening in who work for small and medium enterprises or run them, it can have catastrophic consequences for the organization and for the executive. Furthermore, the 2020 breach of then presidential candidate Biden's Twitter account obviously resulted in a transfer of whatever it was, 100K, I think, to a false account. Could AI have been better used in that situation to spot anomalous usage of the Biden Twitter account and shut that account quicker? And could AI have, and what should private and government sector executives in the audience be doing to harness the power of AI to prevent executive breaches that harm the reputational and financial well-being of their organizations? Is there a potential policy angle to this?
Yeah, go ahead, Apoorv.
So I'll take, I think if you look at, the answer is yes and no. Like AI definitely can help, but if also a lot of the things, especially you talked about Biden attack, if you look at it, there are some basic principles that could have prevented that attack. So social engineering is clearly, like, as if those of you don't know, but Joe Biden's Twitter account got hacked by a teenager who's branded as the mastermind. But really, if you think, and I don't know the full details, Nand, probably you know more details about this, but if you really, the teenager masqueraded as a technical support person and got access to some key accounts within Twitter, and then identified the key controls for high-profile accounts, and then changed those and started tweeting on their behalf. And so social engineering, AI can help in preventing sophisticated social engineering attack, but social engineering can happen with or without AI. And I think there's some very easy ways to protect that yourself, especially if you're a small and medium business. That's one. But as I think I talked about synthetic identity and easy way to sort of create deep fakes and then using those to do social engineering attack is only increasing. So ability to now use AI to prevent that is a key piece. I think other piece on other part, if you look at it, that is that specific attack did use Bitcoin to move financial firms and financial sort of assets there. Key piece here is traceability after the attack is a key piece that we have always used in cybersecurity. With Bitcoin and blockchain, even that goes away. And so again, how you use AI to better trace after the fact what attack happened is going to be critical. So there are various ways, but I think there's some very basic stuff you can do even before you apply AI to prevent these kind of attacks.
Yeah. Let me jump in with maybe something a little controversial, which is I think that AI can help, but I think it's this is coming from the CTO of the Jake, is I think AI is good, but I think it's a band-aid for something that's actually more fundamental, which is the way we treat computer systems today is that we treat them as general purpose computing systems that we can do anything on, and we commingle all of our stuff with the security and architecture of the platforms and systems with these, with the extended amount of data and information that we have. We fundamentally need to start treating computer systems as appliances, right? And I'm a big believer in, when you look at sort of the two classes of security products out there, right? You've got lockdown-oriented security, which is fundamentally more deterministic and more prescriptive. And then you've got the attack-oriented security system products and things, right? AV and sort of more sort of based around the attack surface and the incoming sort of stuff that's coming in. The attack-oriented stuff just hasn't kept up, right? Because there's just an infinite attack surface. There's an infinite number of crafty sort of ways of getting in. When you move to a more lockdown-oriented sort of security model, which is, again, things like zero trust or other pieces, or firewalling, containerization, I think, is driving a very big sort of a move, especially on the server side. The open desktop that is infinitely configurable and usable, right? The fact that unfortunately, the Joe Biden or whoever, I mean, there have been numerous email attacks and things that they actually have that password to be able to then be socially engineered and attacked is a fundamental problem, right? Right there, you've got the issue, which is because that end user simply should not understand or have to know how these systems work at that level of detail to be tricked into giving operator control over, right? The systems have to be rethought and reset in a fundamental way for us to actually enable this level of security at mass scale. So I feel like, AI is just chasing your tail at the end of the problem in terms of forensics and stuff. But all it does is uncovers another vector. It doesn't stop anything.
So let me maybe add a little bit to the controversy, right? So if you really look at some of these statistics and you say, well, 97% of breaches or whatever, 95% of breaches are behavior driven, it really does come back down to the individual. And so what you're saying, Nand, is very valid from the perspective of we cannot possibly imagine that or require an average individual user to be well-versed in the underlying technologies. The onus is, fortunately or unfortunately, on the end user, be it the CEO, the board director, or the employee, to make sure that they are behaving cybersecurely. What the heck does that mean is then becomes the question. And I think there's a fundamental lack of focus at whether it is government organizations from Congress all the way down to your typical small and medium enterprise, from a culture that drives cybersecurity. You obviously work for some of the largest. What are some of the things that you think smaller enterprises could be doing better to drive cultures of cybersecurity? In other words, taking that premise that we should be outsourcing the technology component of cybersecurity to those that know better, couldn't agree more. What do we do about building better cultures of cybersecurity that no longer land our small and medium enterprises and even our bigger enterprises on the front pages with cyber breaches all the time?
Well, I'll take a quick shot, but I'd love David and Apoorv to jump in. Is yes, and I think David was sort of touching on this point, which I think was a brilliant point. Is yes, the prescription of allowing us to outsource this to experts and people who can apply the right brains and resources to securing it does create concentration risk. So there is a secondary problem, which I think is sort of a broader problem that I think we'll deal with in a different, maybe a couple-hour session. But the point is that in turning this responsibility over to them, there are also fundamental product design issues that I think our systems have today. When you look at our email systems, when you look at our computer operating systems, especially on the desktop, et cetera, we again have to rethink the design of these systems with a security first model from the ground up, right? When you look at operating systems like Windows or the Mac or others, right? These are general purpose computing systems that were designed to be open to start with. And security got layered on top. And we've now become sort of used to this fact that we can do anything and everything with these systems and yet still try to retain the level of security, right? Off of it. The two are very incongruous. And requiring an annual cybersecurity training, for instance, I mean, at the end of the game, people are going to exploit the weakest link, right? And you can't expect everyone to take a class and then again go up against a 14-year-old hacker sitting, I've got a 13-year-old at home who probably can, hack into any regular sort of system there because they'll just find the weakest link and go from there, right? It's that level of design that I think we need to fundamentally rethink, that I don't think, because the security industry is a separate bolt-on industry to the platform industry. And, over time, we still haven't paid that sort of technical debt of rethinking sort of the architecture from the ground up. So
I love your take, Nand, and I appreciate it. And I'm going to push it even further and say, so from your perspective of having had the career that you've had, it really makes sense. What I think we also need to be doing more of is, I'll give you one simple example. Very recently, we were approached by a phenomenal company that is doing amazing things in pushing COVID research ahead. and the CEO that's, worth $1 billion or whatever, had no idea what MFA was or what that even should do within the construct of her company. And when you really looked at the security of that company, you're saying to yourself, oh my God, this research is all over the globe now because everybody has access to it. So that issue of how does a board drive a culture of cybersecurity is layered across technology and behavior. And I would actually say that training, you're right, you're never going to be able to catch up to the innovation of the hacker. But that also doesn't mean that we as CEOs and board directors and government officials should be stupid about not doing at least our portion to push the envelope in our organizations. That would be my sort of plug on that. Any other additions or comments on cultures of cybersecurity?
So maybe just very briefly, I would first of all point out that the statistics that that you're quoting about these really super high percentages of attacks being coming from social engineering is in some ways a testament to the success of kind of blocking down the purely tech threat vectors, right? And that's kind of channeled things into what is the weakest link, which is human behavior. So in some ways, we could first of all start and say, well, pat ourselves on the back and say that yes, those machine learning, anomaly detection methods that we've been using already for years are actually working. In terms of how then do you try and shore up the weakest link? Yes, you do awareness raising, and yes, you do training, and you do exercises. We do all of those things. In the end, we're going to have to kind of resign ourselves to the fact that we're not going to get hermetic cybersecurity, right? That's not a realistic goal. There's no silver bullet here, and we need to assume that the attackers are going to get in, and then we need to think about, well, okay, what do we do otherwise? And so, while there are all sorts of things we can do, even some smart things in say behavioral economics that we're experimenting with, nudging people towards better behaviors. In the end, we're really going to try and encourage more just getting backups. Just start with the basics. There are companies that have been hit with some serious ransomware, and they didn't have backups. And some things are really should be basic. And so some of it is really getting those basics right and getting the recovery plans in there, because, like I said, there's not going to be a hermetic solution to anything.
Well, you've heard it here. There are no hermetic solutions on either the behavior or the technology side, and so we've got to do both. It's been a pleasure to have led this panel and this amazing trio of speakers, and to be the co-chairman of the summit. So with that in mind, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, America's Future Series, for putting this amazing event together and for working hard behind the scenes. Hopefully our audience has learned at least a couple of things that they can take away from the perspective of how do they participate in national ecosystemic building better? How do we apply AI better to national security, but really also organization level security? And how do we tackle social engineering problems better from both a behavioral and technology perspective? And also, how do we as a nation focus our attention on better policy, smarter policy, and tech innovation focused policy that doesn't necessarily die out before it even becomes law? So with all that said, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, America's Future Series. On to the next one. Thank you.
And thanks to you as well,
Thank
Andre.
you.
Thank you, Andre. That was
Much appreciated.
fantastic.
And your three panelists. We thank you very, very much. That was just wonderful. It was pretty good stuff, huh, David?
Absolutely, very enlightening.
Yeah, it really was. It was. So thank you. And we certainly hope you all enjoyed it as well. Don't go anywhere. We've still got lots more coming up as we head down on this Tuesday afternoon.